Hello, everyone. I'd like to talk to you today about are data leaders different and what ways their leadership development might require different things than just general leadership roles. And I'll be doing that by sharing really my reflections on my own experience as a mentor of those kind of leaders and as a trainer of their teams. So let's go first to share some of the slides that I've prepared. Okay, leadership development, the focus there, do data leaders face unique challenges as leaders? A little bit of background on me to start with. I have over 13 years experience on the client side of creating and leading data analytics teams, following a career in IT and underwriting and marketing. Made real value there within different parts of Lloyds Banking Group and had the privilege of growing a reasonable size function and managing those people effectively. Since I left corporate life, for the last 6 years, I've been enjoying working on the agency side, if you like, to mentor and coach and train leaders and their teams to do what I call master the people side of data and analytics. And they're just some of the clients who I've got. Let's go back to the question. Do data leaders face different challenges compared to other leaders? First thing that sprung to mind when I thought about this was the many hats that data leaders wear. It's a bit of a hackneyed phrase, but whether you think in terms of hats or masks, I agree with it that data and analytics leaders actually need to be polymaths. They need to be able to demonstrate skill and talk in the language of a whole range of other parts of the business. I did a quick post-it note exercise. Here are the ones that occurred to me. They need to be technology leaders, pioneers often in technology, as knowledgeable, if not more knowledgeable, than the IT department in some tech that could make a difference to that business. They need to be finance leaders. They need to be commercially aware. They need to recognize and leap on really the opportunities to reduce costs, to generate income or profit, etc. They need to be customer leaders, those who can use the power of data analytics to understand customers better and to bring a better experience to those customers or more of what they're looking for through the application of data and analytics, personalization, targeting, etc. They need often to be data counsel, or we could say data conscience, the people who've imbibed and understood not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of GDPR, etc., and can really be ensuring that through all the use of data and analytics, appropriateness and ethics are considered. They need to be marketing and product leaders, people who can see the opportunity to transform marketing through the use of data analytics, particularly as it becomes more automated, and both to develop internal product in the organization to help it run better, but also to develop products that the organization can take to market. And you know that they're the right ones due to data analytics, and sometimes you can help produce them better through data analytics as well. And they need to understand sales, again, both external and internal. The external opportunities to generate sales leads, but the internal influencing role as well. Another hat might be the HR talent pipeline kind of leader. They need to understand a different type of recruit, and it may be a different type of recruitment process than the organization has traditionally used. And they need to be knowledge leaders, people who are capable of curating what's been learned already, presenting it artistically in a way that helps the organization get the key insights and act on them. And they need to be strategy leaders, those who are thinking ahead, future proofing, influencing the direction and the strategy of the organization, and ideally becoming a trusted advisor to the CEO and the top table. So, quite a lot. That was just my quick post-it note exercise. Interested to hear what you think. Any hats you think I've missed there? Feel free to email me if you're listening to this as a recording. The other thing I reflected on was, well, perhaps the different challenges of data leaders spring from what I see when I train data science and analytics teams. I train them in a range of softer skills. Perhaps that can give us some insights. So this is the 9-step model that I use when training analysts and data science teams to perform effective analysis. Thinking about 3 overall phases: contracting really effectively, the technical work, and then delivering it back to the organization, and each of those broken down into 3. In contracting, effective questioning to get to the business need, effective planning and agile ways of working, effective stakeholder buy-in, knowing and flexing your style for those stakeholders. In the technical, the stage of appropriate use of the right methodology to source the data that's needed and prepare it for the analytical work, the analytical modeling work that's needed, and then the insight generation to really get into why you're seeing behavior or patterns that you're seeing. And then in delivering the 3 stages of sign off, thinking about the political implications, and bringing it back to the organization, telling a visual story that's compelling, and bringing a solution back to the organization that's acted upon, changes things, and goes on to pose more questions, hence the circular method. Let me step through these in a little bit more detail, just briefly. And as I do, I'd ask you to be reflecting on, okay, Paul's speaking about this from the point of view of my team, members of my team, but actually, does that apply to a unique challenge for me as a leader? Or what are the unique challenges for me as a leader related to that skill? And let's regroup at the end and see what's occurred to you. Oh, final part that supports all those 9 steps is commercial awareness, and I'll talk a bit more about what I mean under that rather hackneyed phrase. So first off then, questioning. I call it questioning to get to the real business need. What I really mean here is not just being an order taker, receiving what the business has asked of you, but using things like Socratic questioning to ask questions to help that person who's asking you for work to think better, to get behind the request to what the real need of the organisation is, uncover assumptions, explore the evidence, etc. Next stage will be planning. This is both learning from the past and planning ahead, and goodness knows that can make enough of a difference if that's done better, but also thinking about appropriate use of either traditional project management methodologies or agile working methodologies, not being a slave to either method, but adapting them to have a consistent workflow, to have rigor. The third stage, securing buy-in from your key players. This is both identifying but also prioritizing and managing those stakeholder relationships. When you can identify who's most important in terms of things like influence and interest in your work, how can you ensure that the communication style, the way that you interact with them, works for them and achieves what you want out of that relationship? Communicating, collaborating well, managing expectations, etc. So if that whole piece is done well, you should contract really well to do a piece of technical work that is needed by the organisation that they will be acting upon, and you've planned ahead to be sure the amount of effort that will be required. Beginning of the second 3 parts then, appropriate use of the right data methodology. What I mean here is having identified methods for the sourcing, the transformation, the preparation of the data in a way that is repeatable, is robust, is compliant, etc. And that whole work to be sure that you understand your data pipelines, you're confident in the provenance of your data, and indeed confident that you've got access to all the data that could help you properly explore and understand that problem or address that need. Then next, building on that, going on to use appropriate analytical methods, maybe modeling approaches to answer the question, whether that's testing a hypothesis or whatever else. And here I'd really encourage the use of exploratory data analysis, that good practice of exploring the data topology, understanding relationships in that data really well, not just in order to spot outliers, etc., as a completion of the work in data prep, but also to help understand the context, understand the implications, be learning as much from what the data reveals to you as what you went in as a single mind with a question. And using those to answer questions, test hypotheses, produce models, etc. All very familiar, I know, to those on the call, so I won't dwell on that. And then I would call out the need to, at least when you're not simply producing a data product to plug into the organization, generate insights to understand the behavior. How can you dig deeper into motivation, triggers, causation, root cause analysis, etc., to get to why are you seeing what you're seeing? Not just assume that in a current situation with certain context, you'll just see the same again because people are creatures of habit, but to use things like structured questioning techniques, converging evidence from different sources to get to why and what the insights are as to how you could act differently in order to prompt your customers or other stakeholders to act differently. When you've got your insight, or you've got your product, you've got your model that's needed technically, going into the sign-off stage, how can you secure sign-off for the implications of your findings? Particularly here, thinking about navigating organizational politics, often a challenging area for less senior analysts and data scientists who might want to feel they'll keep their hands clean for something as mucky as politics, even though it's everywhere. How can they be sure they've thought about the implications, they understand the skin in the game that different people have got, and they've learned how to agree with the right people, how things should be communicated, how you'll collaborate in order to take that back, influence the organisation, and continue to have their support and buy-in. And then the communication of the actual results once you've got the right target audience, the right mechanism for doing that. Bringing together the twin skills of effective storytelling, hierarchies of communication, narrative, etc., with data visualization best practice to communicate your key findings, the implications for the business, and the recommended actions in a way that they remember, they're engaging, and they can use. And the last of the 9 steps, ensuring your action has a result to deliver the solution. Following up to not just deliver what was required, the technical piece of work, but to be interested, almost like thinking about it like passing a baton in a relay race. Be obsessed and interested with what's someone going to do now with that? How are they going to run the next stage of the race to implement that model or to act on that recommendation from analysis? And to ensure you have the feedback loops to not just have influence so they do take action, but to know what happens when they do. So that that's either captured as useful data for the future, or your means of generating a hypothesis, the assumptions that went into that can be refined in light of what actually happened in practice. And finally, almost like a 10th step, but really supporting all the other 9, informing them all from a commercial awareness, really grounding it not as an academic exercise or as something that just a baked bean factory you don't need to know or understand the product, but that you do understand the context, that a robust understanding of financial performance, the key risks and issues, the profit levers, the business strategy, competitive intelligence, market changes, means that recommendations don't come across as naive or out of context of what matters, but effort and messages are appropriate to the context of that commercial understanding and really help take forward where the business should be focusing now. So that's the model that I use for training softer skills. Might it also answer that question about data leaders? Interested to have initial thoughts on that. Are there extra challenges that you think the leaders of people who need to do that face that are above and beyond leaders of most teams? Any thoughts on that? Interesting. There will be a debate when I do that for live. Okay, the next thing I want to share then is I went back to going around that circle one more time with a post-it note exercise, reflecting on what I had personally learned from mentoring data science and analytics leaders. Without betraying any confidence, obviously all those mentoring and coaching sessions are with client confidentiality totally preserved, but there have been some themes. There have been things I've consistently seen time and time again. Might they fall broadly under the structure of that model, I wondered. My experience was I thought they did. Some of the links were a little tenuous, but hopefully at least it gives a structure for me to share back what I found I remembered and see if it resonates with you. So that first step, from a leadership point of view, it's hearing how much leaders talk about their need to educate and challenge their peers and their seniors, educating and challenging other leaders. What did I hear? I hear people needing to educate their C-suite, educate their board, educate their executive committee on what's possible for an organisation to move beyond just doing the same again. And sometimes what's not possible as well. So a mixture of drumming up suitable demand and managing expectations, which I think I've got as the fourth one there. Yeah. So that role definitely a key challenge because there can be either one of two things I find in organizations. Either the data leader is faced with traditional obstinate refusal to see how things could be radically done differently, or actually things have been so massively overhyped they believe data science or data engineering is coming over the hill to transform the organization and save everybody. Either way, the data leader can be set up for frustration or failure. But the other thing I see is the need to challenge the team and others, that the team needs to step up to what the organisation needs from them sometimes. And sometimes it's been an overly cushy role if they haven't been used as much as they should have been in the past. Or there are other parts of the organisation that, if you're going to be deploying data analytics more effectively than you have to date, you'll drive a greater dependency on them. So again, the need to challenge those other stakeholders effectively can be a key skill for leaders there. That, I find, is an element that I think is particularly challenging for data leaders compared with other leadership roles. Next one I call do what matters most and break some rules. So it's thinking about that planning stage for analysts. What did I recall? Almost every leader that I've mentored or coached has a degree of challenge of managing priorities and time. Obviously, you can't manage time. It's about prioritization and diary management to ensure that the time that you have is used focused on what's most important. And you manage your energy availability, ways of working, etc. But that is normally an effective focus because increasingly there's a heck of a lot dumped at the foot of data leaders, and there's a need for ruthless prioritization and need to be as effective as possible. Otherwise, you'll just be having to say no to too much, and you yourself will become a bottleneck. But I also see the need to break some rules along the way. I think effective data leaders, some of the best that I've seen, ask forgiveness afterwards. They are people whom their teams can rely upon to break through some of the barriers, to make ways where there seem to be no way. And that requires a bit of a maverick streak. It can't be as compliant as some leadership roles would be. And indeed, I think daring to be different is an element of character that can be very helpful. I've found the intellectual and other knowledge that is needed by data leaders, the combination of skill sets that is classically called kind of unicorn, how diverse it can also mean that these are not run-of-the-mill personalities a lot of the time. If they're not on the spectrum somewhere, many data leaders are certainly more different personalities, and they can be incredibly frustrated if they don't feel able to be themselves within the organisation. I would encourage them to understand their strengths and to play to who they are as much as they possibly can, so that it's not just a buzzword of being authentic, but they are able to not be carrying a burden of pretending to be someone else or restraining how they would normally express themselves, as well as all the other work that they've got. Making agile work for you, I made the call out about the importance for analysts of thinking about project management methodologies and agile ways of working. I think it's incumbent upon data leaders to think a bit more outside the box and to be able to say, whether it's bringing Scrum and Kanban together and knocking some of the corners off that, but whatever method you're going to use, say, actually, we're not going to just do this by the playbook, we're going to modify it slightly because that will work for the type of work we're doing here. On the buy-in part, it prompted me to reflect on the amount of time I've seen data leaders need to get to know themselves better, as well as their stakeholders. Raising their self-awareness, including their emotional intelligence, it can be very powerful for all types of leaders. I've seen every type of leadership role benefit from that, just about. But I think particularly technical leaders and those who will interact with a wide diversity of stakeholders in their leadership roles, it can be particularly effective for. And flexing their style to help others. These are almost two sides of emotional intelligence: the greater self-awareness of what's going on within you, and the ability to self-regulate that, and the greater awareness of what's going on in others and the ability to flex your style to work for them. That whole self-awareness and emotional intelligence can be so important in supporting their own teams, who can equally be quite introverted people sometimes with a particular set of skills, and working and influencing effectively across the organisation. Having an intentional stakeholder plan as well. I encourage analysts to produce stakeholder maps. Many of them haven't had effective ones up till then, and to maintain them and to use them to prioritise where they focus, even more so for leaders. And thinking about, I was going to put the term man marking like football, but I guess I want to say person marking, because absolutely I'm thinking about men and women. Relationship management. Okay, who is going to predominantly manage the relationship with that senior stakeholder? Does it need to be you as the data leader, or do you have some direct reports who could pick that up? Would that be appropriate? At the beginning of the technical work, I was prompted to think how much data leaders need to build and protect a safe space to learn. In all the work that they do, it has to be that they've implemented a set of systems and controls. So first off, there is safety because there is rigor. There are controls to ensure you don't fall into inappropriate use of data, that you don't end up unable to reproduce results, etc. And that you bring together the roles that are needed. Sometimes it's almost like certain teams I've seen under particularly effective data leaders, it's become a bit of a refuge or a sanctuary that technical people who've been misunderstood elsewhere can come together in an area that understand how the technical roles fit together, understand how to manage and nurture and develop technical people well, and achieve greater autonomy. Absolutely key, I think, to data leaders that they have a greater autonomy rather than being controlled by parts of the organization that do not understand what they're there to do. And within that, protect space to test and learn. That in an area that does have suitable controls and it's got the right roles to do the work and it has autonomy as well as accountability and responsibility for delivering this technical capability in the organization, they are allowed and protected to fail. So not fail fast for the sake of it, but there is a test and learn culture and a space that you can control to do that without getting slapped down by IT. What did analysis prompt me? It prompted me to think about how data leaders almost need to sit on the fence a bit between staying almost went to just singing then, sorry, but avoiding micromanaging. What I mean by that, I mean, every technical leader I've known has a bit of a challenge to step back from the hands-on work. Many have succeeded to become more senior in the organisation precisely because of their technical skills. And yet they recognise they don't want to micromanage and stifle and be all over the people who are now the technical trusted experts in the team. So they need to learn how to empower their team, how to not retain too much control themselves, but delegate effectively, empower their people to learn the skills that they need and to learn by being accountable and having responsibility. To keep up to date with best practice, even if they don't need to know full technical detail, understand what they need to have sufficient knowledge of in the wider data ecosystem, the options, the developing skills and technology that is now available. And protect technical stars, as I call them, from performance management systems. I've yet to find a performance management system in an organization that really works for technical expertise, for people who are less demonstrative, are not necessarily going to be seen and perceived by those outside of the technical area. The rest of the organization is superb, but the technical people know what a difference they make through their technical expertise. There's a need for data leaders to protect them. Final thing that occurred in this technical area was developing what I call an attitude of insight and influence. What do I mean by that? Avoiding that label of backroom boffins, proactively getting out there and getting your people out there so that the team is seen as interested and engaged with the rest of the business, not wanting to be kept in the dark and fed, the proverbial. Not wanting to be seen as propeller heads or rocket scientists, but being seen as people who do have technical skills, but absolutely have pragmatism, commercial interest, and a desire to make things deliver and make a difference. The use of a competency framework, the benefits of being really clear as to the competencies, the different levels of maturity in that competencies, and the full spectrum of them that are needed for different roles and across a whole team. And being able to use a structure like that to effectively design a team, to design appropriate roles, to measure people's performance, to guide your learning and development can be incredibly powerful. But a more tailored and technical competency framework than is true in many other parts of the organisation, where these can tend to be quite generic documents from IT and HR. Inspiring learning from others, that they encourage others to really invest in their personal development and to be interested at constantly developing their skills and learning about the rest of the organisation. So kind of twin tracks of role modelling and encouraging that commitment to personal development and growth and continual learning, and also role modelling that getting out there in the rest of the organisation and the critical importance of domain expertise. And developing a focus on outcomes, that you develop that focus that I talked about before as almost a baton passing in a relay race, that there is a focus on, it's not the end of our technical work that is where our interest ends, it's the delivery and the implementation of that to make a difference in the organisation. First of the last three, develop your confidence in your long-term investment. So for sign-off, developing the real confidence as a senior leader in the organisation to successfully influence and get the investment that you need, and thinking long-term about what that investment is. So developing confidence, a challenge for almost every senior leader, but I think again can be challenging for people who have come from a more introverted and technically focused background. Acting up and mentoring your team to act up. I find that a lot of effective data leaders, in order to have the influence that they need, and in order to be focusing on the right people to talk about appropriate use of this expertise, are as a standard engaging with and talking to people level up in the organisation, not their peers. They still obviously have effective working stakeholder relationships with their peers, absolutely. But there's often a need to influence and work with people a level up, and that is something you role model across your team. And managing the team like a profit center, protecting the technical work from being wasted in flights of fancy or things that are just hobbies of interest, so that it is seen as a cost, but also being able to demonstrate that the team makes incremental profit for the organization, that beyond what it costs, it generates profit or income in excess of that. And successfully securing investment for the long term. Out of that understanding data leaders have of not just the technical components needed now, but how those areas are developing, the trends that they need to be keeping in view, and the understanding of where they're making a difference and where they need to focus, and the strategy for the organization, being able to make compelling cases for what the technical infrastructure, what upskilling of the people is needed to be ready for future phases of capability that the organization will need. In visual stories, role modeling, they're very good professional communicators. For many, needing to work on improving their professional impact, finding their own voice and their gravitas in how they interact with other people. And for many, also communicating succinctly. Again, the background of data or technical work can encourage people to become overly detailed, overly verbose. How can they become more succinct in doing that? And to role model using visual stories. Less text, more pictures, but effective use of text and data visualization skills to tell stories. If you're going to require that of your team, that is particularly a skill I think data leaders need to master to role model it. And for the final solution part, before we get to commercial awareness, the thinking outside silos and being accountable for impact. As data leaders need to influence other leaders to take action, I think maybe more so than almost any other leader in an organization, they need to think about not just their silo, but how the whole of the rest of the organization operates and how their technical skill could be impacted or can help that area of the organization. Joining the dots, acting beyond the silos to warn, influence, and help and work collaboratively with other leaders. Planning a long-term talent pipeline so that you will be ready for those wider needs around the organization, and holding yourself and your team accountable for impact. Example here, leaders and teams who I've seen be very good at this have commercial targets. Yes, there are lots of elements of those commercial targets that are not under their control. However, they can influence quite a bit of it. And they are perceived and welcomed as having skin in the game by the sales or the marketing or the operation team whose commercial targets they share. And so it's been well worthwhile. They've definitely gained more than they've lost in terms of sharing that target and thus being more party to the conversations and the negotiation that's needed to get there. And finally, on commercial awareness, I think part of the challenge is that data leaders need to even be more commercially minded than their peers. Maybe it's coming from an initial prejudice that you won't be, that you'll just be a data geek. But I find data leaders need to be really interested in their business. Understanding and able to briefly and quickly articulate what different parts of the business are there to do, the challenges and the opportunities that they provide, and how data and analytics can help them. Developing external profile and knowledge also helps in terms of being more influential in the persuasion that data leaders need to bring and in nurturing that domain knowledge in your own team. And establishing the commercial credibility, that's that kind of being on the spike point that I mentioned before at a senior level. And calculating and demonstrating that you can measure an ROI from your team. That will often put you ahead of marketing, operations, and many other functions in the business. But if you are able to prove that you can run your function like a profit center, you understand the way the wider organization works, and you have active engagement and interest in making a difference and getting that wider organization operating really well, because you know and you see where data analytics can make a difference. To me, those are areas where data leaders' roles go above and beyond. Okay, interested in opening it up now. Thanks for what you've shared so far, but what do you think? Do you think data leaders do have a bigger challenge than other roles? Am I underplaying the challenge of other leadership roles? Anything that I've prompted you from what I've shared? Thank you for watching this recording.